For those of you who haven't met me or seen me before, I'm Morten Kromberg. I'm the CTO for the last 17 years, pretty much. And it's my privilege to tell you a little bit about what it is we're going to be, well, what we're thinking of doing for you, so that you can give us feedback over this week and in the future, of course. Because I don't really know what's everything that's happening at Dyalog at the moment. There's so many people who work here now that, in fact, these are some of the things that I know about, and there's other stuff going on. Fortunately, typically when I discover something I didn't know about, I just say, that's wonderful. And the lanes that are parallel to this are, in fact, parallel. People are doing the right stuff. So, yeah, I had a bit of fun with the logo. Where's the sound? There was supposed to be sound there. I'll try it again. No? Oh, well. Vroom! Right. Okay, so one thing that's actually, as I said, we're growing, and not just because we need more people, but also because we've lost some people who really contributed a lot to Dyalog. I think next week is 1 year anniversary of Roger's passing, and John's 2.5 years before that. So maybe a toast for John and Roger this evening. Our Jeff is here, and he's still going strong. He wrote version 1.0 of Dyalog back in 1981 to 1983 with John Scholes. And it's incredibly good for us that we still have, Jeff has been here ever since then. And but he intends to quit while the going is good. So he's been winding down slowly, and he's given us a year's notice. So in April next year, Jeff intends to stand down. I hope we can welcome him back in next year or the year after for a retrospect, what I learned at Dyalog or something like that. Jeff is an incredibly dedicated man. This is actually something he's been doing for longer than working for Dyalog. Before he started working for Dyalog, I believe, he started volunteering for an organization that delivers blood to hospitals by motorcycle. And I think probably Jeff is going to be doing that after he retires from Dyalog still, right? Or are you going to quit? Yeah, so and here's the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, Jeff wearing a suit, receiving his award. So amazing, Jeff. We're going to miss you. Hopefully you'll come in for a cup of tea. Yeah. The good news, of course, is pretty much all of these people are here. There are a couple of people who couldn't come. We screwed up. There's a Jewish holiday this week that we missed. So Adam is not here, and Nathaniel stayed behind as well. But all of these other people who were hired, say, in the last 10 years are here, so you can talk to them about your needs. And it's really good to have these people because they are changing our direction. They have all sorts of input that are going to make Dyalog APL much more appropriate for attracting the next generation of users, which is what you would expect. Yeah, the last row of people who joined this year, and a really amazing fun fact is that these three guys all mentioned Plan 9 in their resumes. I don't think Nathaniel did, and maybe Peter there will tell you a bit more about what Plan 9 is. So one thing that I shouldn't say unfortunately, or I'll be struck down by lightning, one of the things that we discover as we add so many people is that we really need to look at our internal process. I think I mentioned this in my talk last year. So we've embarked on an actual formal review of our internal routines. We're using something called BSIM that compares what we do to the most common industry practices. And so we'll have the kind of process that you should have continuously reviewing how you deal with security risks in particular. Though at Dyalog we've decided that the risk of the interpreter computing wrong results is actually a higher risk to most of our customers than the classical security threats of somebody breaking into the APL interpreter. So we've decided to treat those using the same process as most companies would treat security threats. We were hoping to be ready for a BSIM audit this year, but yeah, how time flies when you're having fun. But although we're not ready for the audit yet, this is already significantly changed the way we work at Dyalog. So it's something we're really benefiting from already without the audit report. So if you'd like to meet a couple of the most recent recruits, there's a talk by Peter on Plan 9. Actually, Dyalog APL, although he's only been here 3 months, I think, Peter. So he can't really talk about his work at Dyalog, but he'd already written an APL interpreter before he joined us for Plan 9, and he's going to talk about that. And Carter is going to talk about performance work that he's doing at the moment on Tuesday. So the second activity, which again is something that really is ramping up rapidly. I've shown this slide before, but there's more faces on it this time. So we really are producing very significantly more materials for learning APL. We've got course materials. Gary Bergquist's old tutorial that you may have seen has been given a facelift by Andrew Sengul. It's not quite released yet, but there's going to be a modern version of that. And one thing which is really, really good, on the bottom row there, we have people like Stefan Kruger, who did a presentation at APL Seeds, or Apple Seeds, a couple of years ago, about a book he's written. And Jesus is second from the left, is going to be working on materials. And also this gentleman on the right, I'll show a slide about him. Should also mention Ray Polivka, who's here. Ray is doing a talk on, I think it's the 4th book that Ray has written on APL. That's roughly one a decade, or every, 12 and a half years, or something like that. And he's going to be talking about why that's important. The last one here is really interesting. So this just came out of the blue. This gentleman has written fastai.github.io. He's been teaching an APL course online. Completely outside of our control. I mean, we've been looking at it and commenting on it. He's Jeremy Howard. He's quite well known in AI circles, and he's a big fan of APL and has decided to start running workshops online and publishing materials. So this kind of stuff is just happening with increasing frequency. So the evangelism work that Richard Park and Rodrigo and Aaron and Adam, of course, have been doing is really starting to pay dividends. We're being pulled rather than having to push so much. So one thing we did last year, for example, we trained a group of 24 developers in India via Zoom. That was very hard work. People had to get up at 5 a.m. to teach these Indians. And some of them were trying to learn APL on a cell phone. So it was quite challenging, but several of these people, I think about a third of them, are still in employment after that, which I think is very successful. If you bring in a group of 24 random IT people and teach them APL, if you've got 1/3 of them still doing APL a year later, that's very successful. And all these materials that we prepare during activities like that are, of course, free. We have no intention of trying to make money out of running courses, not at the moment anyway. We're considering running online courses that we would charge for because we have to allocate resource to that, or maybe offering all these materials for self-study and then publishing times when our people will be available for students to ask questions. So if you have a training need and you think we could help you with that, please get in touch with Richard Park. He's driving this side of things. One thing which I think will contribute a lot to spreading APL is this basic license which we introduced with version 18.2. In many ways, I think this, although it's not actually a feature of 18.2, it's the most important thing that we did in 18.2. We're essentially relaxing the terms of the non-commercial license. So you can use APL as long as your revenues do not exceed £5,000 in a calendar year. So we're starting out a bit careful. I know many other companies have $10 million of revenue as their limit, but we're starting out carefully. Maybe that number will go up depending on what the feedback is. But you can now quite safely, if you were worried about the terms of the non-commercial license before, you can just start using APL even commercially, and at the end of the first year, we will expect a royalty payment if you made significant money. But you don't need to worry about it until that time. So, it's, for all these kinds of things that you might want to do with APL, proof of concept, you can even, and this is a special exemption, I think, if people participate in programming competitions and they make more than £5,000 in prize money, we will waive the fee. So, yes. All right, so still under the heading of evangelism and training, these new people are using platforms that are slightly different from the makeup of the people in this room, and they're complaining about how our keyboarding works under Linux, typically. And even for the established users who have keyboarding working as expected, we're starting to face some challenges. Under Windows, Microsoft has a new class of applications, which I think they call Windows Universal Platform. And that does not support the IME, the Windows IME, in its current incarnation. So under Windows 11, if you use Notepad, you'll find that the IME doesn't work. And there's a new desktop, I'm not sure what the right word is to describe Wayland, but it's a piece of desktop framework for Linux where we find that some of the keyboarding that worked on X Windows no longer works. And then all the new users are reporting that the control key, they really don't like the use of the control key, as some of you have also complained. So we're running a project at the moment that we will finish in the version 19 timeframe, we hope, where we take a completely new look and start providing alternative keyboards, maybe alternatives to control, so you can easily say, I'd rather use Alt or Alt Graphics. And there's the longer-term project, so this problem at the top is going to take a little bit longer to resolve. We need a completely new IME. Microsoft has new technology, and we'll be starting a project to do that. That may take a year or two, we don't know yet. But we're hoping to build a cross-platform IME, which will work the same way on Windows, Linux, Mac, and so on. Cross-platform is becoming everything for us. So some talks later this week. Traditionally, we've had the last day, the Thursday, as sort of the forward-looking day, and so we've put all of these things related to finding new APLers and training them on the Thursday morning. Okay, so this, Stina actually already covered this in detail. We did actually start building a consulting group. In 2019, we hired Josh and one other person in the US. The other guy didn't quite work out. Josh worked out spectacularly, so he's still there. But then the market just dried up completely, and we did nothing about it for 2 years. But as Stina mentioned, we're now getting a lot of requests for consulting, particularly in the US. I think people have downsized during COVID, and now they need the consultants back, but they've decided to retire and they're not interested, and that kind of thing. Some people are just growing their business. They have completely new initiatives to go on the cloud, and they need new APL resource. So please, if you need consulting or you know somebody who might be a good consultant, get in touch. There's no presentations about that. Okay, so this is still one of the main lanes on the highway. So this is, I pull this up, I think, about every year and point out that I talked about this the first time at Dyalog 8 in Elsinore when we had the Unicode version. And we had the first tools. This is something called Compare It. It was a source code comparison tool, which all the way back in 2008 could just compare APL source code because it was now Unicode, and we had ways of writing it to text. This is now really starting to take off after only 15 years. And we have customers now coming up to tell us we're doing it too slowly and we need to accelerate the pace of our support for this. And the reason why it's becoming so important is that there are all these fantastic tools out there for editing, comparing, doing continuous integration, testing frameworks, etc., that are all really based around the idea that you have your source code in text files. And these tools are actually really good, APL people. There are people out there who are not using APL, who are really smart, and have developed really good tools that we could benefit from. Yeah, think about that. So things that we've done recently here. So there's a tool called Link, which is our sort of primary tool for making sure that you can have your source in text files, but just use it in the workspace the same way you used to do. There's a version 3 of that tool, which is included in version 18.2, and which you can install for 18.0, which is intended to replace an older tool called Salt. We did a workshop on this yesterday, and it all pretty much worked. Of course, people found a glitch or two, but this is reaching industrial strength now. You can safely, even the conservative people, should be taking a look at this. In recent versions of APL, we've also moved in the direction of being able to launch your APL interpreter directly from text source. So you don't need to have a workspace to boot the stuff up. You can just point APL at a folder containing text source, and the APL interpreter knows how to load it and run it. And there's also a special case of that, which is particularly interesting for the Unix crowd, is the support for hashbang or shebang scripting, where you can now have a text file of input to the APL interpreter and just feed it into the interpreter and automate your process, maybe load other source files, etc. So that's done. And a closely related topic is project managers, because once you have your source code in text files, you need tools to go a little bit further and do things like manage dependencies or load multiple folders into your workspace, some of which you're working on and some of which are copies of other people's work. So we have Acre, which is something the Carlyle Group has been using for more than 10 years. They now transition to something called Dado, which provides GitHub integration. And at Dyalog, we're working on something called Cider, which is intended to be a more agnostic project manager. And a package manager, which is something I'm really happy to see, that we now actually have a working package manager for APL. This is called Tatin. It's a Tatin tart is a nice way of packaging apples, right? With a fantastic logo made by Adam, which looks both like a pie and the APL logarithm symbol. And at the moment, you can see that the packages which are there are mostly Kai Jaeger's work, because he's been working on packages for many years, and he wrote Tatin, so he put all of his stuff in there. And then Davin Church has been one of the main testers of this, so he's put a few of his things in. And I'm really happy to announce, there's a champagne moment. Last week, Dyalog added the first 2 Dyalog packages to this. So our most important tools for delivering APL services and for using using HTTP resources on the internet are now packages that you can download from here. Those are champagne glasses, if you can't see at the back. There's a Unicode character with 2 champagne glasses being knocked together. So there's a lot more work to do here still. We need to publish many more packages. I hope that you will publish some of your utilities as packages and help the community. This is something that new people coming to APL really are disappointed if they don't find good packages. So it's a really important part, again, of the evangelism, and as well as being really important for your own work. And as I said, some major customers have already moved to this. New users all expect that they start with text source. They don't like workspaces at all. And all of our new tools are published as GitHub projects using text source. And we're also starting to take advantage of some of this continuous integration work now, where every time we commit a change, it's tested on all platforms, which will increase the quality of the tools and the APL interpreter. So a part of, an important part of this is having a notation for variables. So you easily understand you can put functions and operators source into files, but some applications also have constants that are part of the source. And so we need a notation for this, which is something we've been working on for many years and are close to having working. So more on that. Well, you missed the workshop yesterday. I'm going to be talking more this afternoon about projects and packages at 2 o'clock. Right, so service orientation. As APLers, we're really accustomed, most of us, to writing what they call full-stack applications. So we have the user interface in APL and the logic. But what's becoming really important is the ability to run APL as a service. So you can package your APL code. Say you have this business logic. If you load Jarvis, you can just say jarvis.run and a port number, and those a pointer to that folder, that namespace containing the functions. And here's an example, or here are examples in 6 languages of how you can then reference that. You can make a call to that business logic. The APL is a one-liner, of course. And in other languages, it's just slightly more verbose, but any programming language that's out there knows how to call these web services. So if you expose your APL code as services, anybody can call your APL code, both locally and across the internet. So work that we've done. The Jarvis Web Service Framework, again, is now, it's a package. It's quite well tested. It's being used in just about every project I've seen started recently. At any customer site, Jarvis is involved, because this really is an important way to expose things. We've done some work on the interpreter, so version 18.2 is perfectly happy now to run also under Linux and a Mac without a terminal attached, which makes it easy to run in a container, which is a very popular way to deliver services. RIDE has been enhanced to properly debug threaded code, which is something you often have when you're running services, and some work on quad.json to make it a better tool for formatting data in JSON, which is what is typically used by these tools. Yep, so I'm also embedding under the heading of service orientation all the work that we're doing to make all the Dyalog platforms more similar. Because a very common pattern that you see with services is that people will be on a Windows or a Mac desktop and they'll do their development there, but then they'll deploy the service and maybe debug it under Linux. So that means it's really important that the developer experience is as similar as possible on all platforms. We have a new .NET bridge coming out, where .NET has become, Microsoft has made .NET a cross-platform thing, so .NET is available pretty much on all the platforms where Dyalog APL is available. So if you like .NET, that's going to be available everywhere. And we're working on unifying configuration, because at the moment, the way you configure a Windows interpreter and a Linux interpreter are quite different. We've introduced text files for configuration, which means that you can get that to be the same everywhere as well. And we have this goal by the end of this year or early next year of publishing examples which show you how to develop, deploy a really industrial strength service in APL, scale it on the cloud, have user sessions, use things like Google for authentication externally if you want to do that, or run your own authentication server, encrypt the data, etc. So this is going to be a big focus area for us in the years to come. And still related to service orientation, as you have more and more of these processes running in various places, you need a way to monitor your APL interpreter. So we're going to be providing an API. Hopefully there'll be a prototype of this in version 19.0, where you can have a monitoring station where you receive information from all of your running APL interpreters as to how much CPU they're using, whether they've crashed, etc. So that's, hoping this will be in version 19. It's certainly something that has to come very soon. Yep, so there were workshops on building and deploying services yesterday, and Norbert, I think, is going to be a bit service-oriented in his talk about how he builds stuff on AWS. And then Brian has a summary of the workshops, essentially, on Wednesday, where he's going to talk more about that. If you do want to do the full stack thing, and a lot of this is going to be important in the future. I don't think all APLers are going to be comfortable with writing web services and then asking some guy to write the front end in JavaScript or something like that, or learn JavaScript themselves. So it is really, I see it as critically important for the long term that APL also has a way for APL developers to write full stack applications and do their own user interface. And we can see that the adoption of this HTML renderer thing that we added, I don't know how many years ago now, John, 5? Must be something like 5 years ago. So the HTML renderer is essentially it's a thing where you can create it and you can give it some HTML, and it'll give you a window that renders that HTML and JavaScript, and it'll work exactly the same way on Windows and Mac and Linux. So that's working fine. It embeds something called the Chromium Embedded Framework, which is the same engine which is inside Chrome. What is not clear is how people should generate HTML JavaScript. So for a decade, we've had something called MyServer that can do that. People haven't really learnt to love that. People are experimenting with writing their own tools. But this is critical. I hope we'll see some packages from people, from the community, on how to generate HTML JavaScript. Or take another look at MyServer and find out that, well, it's quite usable. I think it is. So work that we're doing right now in this area is, find a way to upgrade Chromium. That's something a lot of people have asked for because Google finds bugs in Chromium and upgrades it, and there's no really fast path, so the HTML render lags a bit behind. And then a feature that users have asked for. So there's going to be no less than 4 presentations where I believe the HTML renderer will be used, all people outside Dyalog. So I'm really happy to see that this is catching on. Yeah, so Microsoft.NET. That's, I think, celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, the Microsoft.NET framework. And John built the user interface, the interface to it almost immediately, right? Dyalog supported it as it came out from Microsoft. We were invited, in fact, John Scholes, to participate in the design of the .NET framework back in more than 20 years ago. Microsoft has decided to try and move away from their proprietary .NET to a cross-platform open source .NET. And they've done it in a very bewildering way where it's changed its name. So the framework is the old one. It's only available for Windows. There was something called .NET Core, which is now just .NET. And the version numbers of .NET, you can see the framework is 1, 2, and 4, whereas the core is 3, 5, 6, and 7. They are very similar, but not identical. So we're doing significant work to build a bridge to the new .NET. And there is an early version of that in 18.0 came out, I think, enhanced a little bit in 18.2. But the one that's there at the moment only allows you to use .NET things. It doesn't yet allow you to expose your APL code as a .NET assembly and run, thereby allow people to run applications which embed .NET. That's on the to-do list for version 19. And hopefully that'll allow you then to generate APL-based applications. So maybe something on top, maybe pure APL-based applications on all of these platforms using .NET. And there's some work on async features that I don't have time to go into. Maybe John will talk about something later. But in a nutshell, it should work the same way as it did before. But we're going to, because the .NET framework is not identical in terms of the libraries and so on that it provides, you're going to have to change your applications if you move them a little bit. You're going to have to change them a little bit to go from framework to .NET, not because of changes we've made, but because of changes Microsoft has made. And therefore, we'll take the opportunity to make some small changes, perhaps, in our bridge as well. Right, what else? Right, there's new target platforms out there. How many Mac M1 users? Okay, I suppose that's enough, right? But actually, so there's this new 64-bit ARM processor, which is low power and all that, and Apple decided to move, for the third time change processor platform in their history on the Macs. And so we got M1 Macs. There's a 64-bit Raspberry Pi. And I think actually the most interesting one is the fact that Amazon has their own version of 64-bit ARM, which they are offering on their cloud, something they call Graviton. And why is that important? Well, because it's low power, and when you're running on the cloud, you're basically paying for electricity burnt in the data center. And there's somebody here, Circle CI blog, who says he's done some experiments and it looks as if you can save 40% in your costs using ARM64. And ideally, Dyalog APL will be identical on ordinary Intel Linux and ARM64 Linux, so there may be very significant savings to be had running on the cloud. And on the Microsoft.NET blog, we can see there's a guy blogging about ARM64, specific ARM64 performance improvements in .NET 7, so it's obviously something that Microsoft is taking seriously as well. Right, so that's very concrete. We're hoping to have 64-bit ARM Mac M1 support, officially supported in version 19, right, Andy? We've got the test framework set up for it already. Andy's not responding. That is the plan. So if you have an M1 Mac, you should be able to run version 19 on it. Then there's this thing called WebAssembly, which is an attempt to sort of displace JavaScript somehow. JavaScript has become like an assembly language for running inside the browser. And there's a new technology which is supported by the 4 major browser engines called WebAssembly, which is something where you can get a C compiler to compile your C code to it. So in theory, we should be able to maybe cut down Dyalog APL a little bit because it's using features that are not available in that environment. It's not something we have concrete plans for, except maybe Aaron. Aaron mentioned he was hoping he could run codefens on WASM. I don't know when we'll have a Dyalog version for WASM. It won't be in the next year, but it's something where we will start a research project soon to run the interpreter also there. Yep. And compiling APL, another piece of holy grail. Aaron, you can't read that? You're squinting. It says, that's too much. The number one programmer excuse for legitimately slacking off. I'm compiling. So, is it the 10th anniversary, Aaron? No, maybe more, of your codefens research, the start of your codefens research work. And it hasn't quite taken off yet, but we're getting very close to having an APL compiler that we think will compile a lot of your code. But I think we're also recognizing that the focus of an APL compiler is really maybe more making APL accessible in other environments and for new types of applications. Because those of you who have written large APL systems have, of course, constructed them and optimized them to run on the interpreter. And a lot of the code that you have written isn't going to, well, it isn't going to run at all on the compiler because it calls Oracle on every second line of code, and that isn't going to be supported in the compiler. Or it's specifically organized to work well on the interpreter, and you would get, if you want to use a compiler, you should rewrite it. And very few of you have much of an appetite for rewriting significant parts of your code. Whereas the new users don't have that problem. So I think I'm starting to think of this, I mean, it may be useful to you to speed up hotspots in your applications, but really this is something that targets the future. There's a number of talks this week that are somehow related. Okay, so Rodrigo's not really talking about the compiler, but I think a lot of the work you did, Aaron and Rodrigo, on this were done using the compiler. We have Justin here who's going to talk about work that he's done to integrate APL into compiler. We have Yuso from the University of Oxford, who's inspired by APL in his work on scheduling array operations, and then Aaron's going to give us an update. And finally, track 10, the literal array notation I spoke of as something that's important in the context of source code management, but it's actually much more useful than that. If we could, inside APL functions, have a better notation for namespaces, for example, so we can explicitly write namespaces with a syntax that looks a bit like JSON. And that is one of the things that the literal array notation will do. That would be very valuable. And we're going to send out a broadcast to the community with the current proposal very soon and ask you all for input. This is something Adam has been talking about the array notation about every year for 5 years. He's been working on it with Phil last. We think it's time now maybe to commit it to C code, and we'd really like to have your input on that. And then there's loftier enhancements to the APL interpreter. There's some new primitives that are in other array languages that we think would be useful. And there's these, we want to be able to support 64-bit integers and rational numbers in Dyalog APL in the next, I don't know, and I'm going to put a number on that. But it's something we need to do, I think, to make APL complete. And we have some ideas on that we're going to be pursuing. So Adam is not here, but he's going to be doing a remote presentation on Thursday in that forward-looking section on what he thinks are the most important primitives that we need to put into the interpreter, what he calls filling the core language gaps. And I promised JD not to say anything about what he's going to talk about. So those are the things I know about that we're doing. And a lot of these are things that we've worked on for a very long time that I feel now are actually starting to come to fruition, and people are starting to adopt. So I'm quite happy about how that's working out, in fact. And we'll put wheels on the logo. And there's still no sound. Vroom! Thank you. John, you're next.